Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's webcast, Protecting Microsoft 365. Our presenter today is Ananth. He is the president of NetShrian and the co-creator of our managed threat protection SIM platform, EventTracker. So without further ado, let me turn this over to Ananth. Take it away, sir.
Thank you, David. Good day to you all. Even in these COVID times, it's a lot to ask for an hour of your time, so we all very much appreciate your attending. The topic today is to protect Microsoft 365. They have, of course, changed the name. This used to be Office 365 not too long ago, but then you roll with the punches. That's what we're really going to talk about. It's become a real target for a lot of high-profile, sophisticated attackers. And the reason why is not hard to know. After all, it has become extremely popular. Microsoft has essentially replaced all of its traditional online activities, online programs, I should say, with, or rather its on-premise programs with this online version. And a lot of folk expect that M365 is working for not just productivity applications, but also for collaboration. And given that a lot of us are working from remote locations, not necessarily in the office, that's a big deal. So in other words, your productivity, the productivity of your employees and their effectiveness sort of depends upon this Microsoft 365 infrastructure, which not only contains all of the Office applications, but also a copy of Azure Active Directory. Now, frequently, many people think of it as the repository for email, but honestly, it's a lot more than that. With the arrival of Teams and the popularity of OneDrive and SharePoint, it's beyond email. You may be surprised, but did you know your developers are probably sharing API keys, the seed keys through Teams? And so if someone got access to Office 365, M365, and launched an e-discovery with the appropriate credentials, they're probably going to see that stuff. And you never thought of it as being email. So there's a lot more there than just email. Now, of course, it's a software as a service. That was the whole point, right? They were not going to ask you to run this application on your little old desktop or indeed even on servers, but Exchange was going to be in the cloud, software as a service. But guess what? Just because you subscribed to it doesn't absolve you of responsibility. Microsoft's responsible for the server being up. If there's a problem with Teams, as there was some days ago, that's Microsoft's problem to restore connectivity. But you are the data owner. And as such, you are eventually responsible for data safety. Just by subscribing, you didn't absolve yourself of blame. That's something that I get asked from time to time. But why do I need to bother? Isn't that Microsoft's problem? And the answer is no. There are some things that are Microsoft's problem, guarding their infrastructure from being attacked. But then a lot of it is really honestly your problem. And that's where we see the gaps. That's what the attackers are busy exploiting. Now, you know that Microsoft doesn't really put any access restrictions. Anybody, anywhere on the internet, anywhere in the world can actually get to O365 and your tenant and get the username, login, the prompt password. There is no VPN requirement. There is no other kind of restriction. That means that access to your tenant is completely governed by who you provided username, password to and what your policies were. Microsoft doesn't have any responsibility in this area. That's something to bear in mind. Just by transferring your data to M365, you didn't get absolved of responsibility. So you're granting access, you're configuring it, you're monitoring it. So really, this is on you. So what's been going on then? If you go back and look at the attack trends in the last, let's say 1 year, the fact of the matter is 71% of these deployments in this survey suffered 7 legitimate account takeovers. And that means that the attackers were able to gain access to M365 and were able to do something with that data, that critical data that's in there. And this is a recent survey from a couple of months ago. Why is this a big deal? Well, aside of the fact that even if you were in the office, losing data or giving away access to data that's in M365 would be considered heinous. But now it's even worse because we're a remote workforce and we're more dependent than ever before on these applications to get our jobs done. So the fact that this trend is occurring, and we're talking about medium companies here. We're not talking about the biggest of the big. We're not talking about the stealthy nation state actors that are out there chasing down Mission Impossible. We're talking about the run-of-the-mill. By the way, that nation state stuff makes its way to generic cybercrime fellas very, very quickly. In the beginning, it's only the nation states that have the capacity to exploit, and they launch very sophisticated, very stealthy exploits against very high-profile targets. After all, Solarigate, or the attack against SolarWinds, was used to infiltrate by the Russians some very high-profile targets in a super stealthy kind of way. But once that attack technique was found out, lots of cyber criminals tried to get in on the action. So then the other question that I hear from time to time from customers or prospects is, but then why is this a concern? It's not like malware can get installed in Office 365, right? After all, that infrastructure is sitting in Azure somewhere under Microsoft's control, and they're not going to be dumb enough to allow malware to get on there. Isn't that the way I normally get hacked? Well, I got news for you, that you are right in the sense that malware isn't making its way to M365. But guess what? Attackers are using legitimate tools that are part and parcel of the suite to attack. Very common, popular one is Power Automate. As you'll see in the demo in a couple of minutes, that's exactly what the whole SolarWinds thing from late last year was about. Get access through a supply chain, and finally make your way to the cloud from that on-premise endpoint that's been compromised, and then establish a foothold for a long period of time. So these are tools within the official M365 arsenal, which once the attacker compromises your authentication mechanism, they will abuse these tools to do things with it that you never thought they could ever be used for. So to simply say that malware can't get to Office 365, therefore I'm safe, is to miss the point. Therefore, you must think about not just subscribing to Office 365, but then what is your investment in people, in technology, in monitoring? And so really the cost of moving to O365 is above and beyond just that cost of having to deal with the license fee. There's monitoring costs, there's configuration costs that you should think about. This point is not lost. The majority of businesses that were surveyed in that survey that is there in the first point, this is going back to March, had come to that conclusion that they needed to increase their investment in people and technology. Now, if you're an MSP, this is a message you want to bring to your customer. By simply buying a M365 subscription and converting away from what was on-premise to the Microsoft cloud, the buck didn't stop there. They do need to think about what it is, and hopefully that's through you, the MSP partner, what it takes to actually safeguard all of this stuff. So remember I said to you that legitimate tools are being used. So look in the very last portion of the slide. In order to complete the mission, they're using forwarding rules, Graph API, e-discovery, and these are all capabilities right in M365. They're not introducing any malware to it. So the kill chain, or the sequence or the life cycle of attacks is what you see. They will do reconnaissance by looking at Active Directory, presuming that that's where you really have your accounts. They will try to compromise you by guessing password, as a for instance, which is why looking at failed logons is a big deal. You remember how it used to be in your on-premise that if you got 3 login failures, you were locked out for a while? What happens in Azure AD? What happens if your on-premise network is compromised? So how do you establish then a foothold? By changing around the conditional access policies, by using OAuth, which is the primary method in which authentication is done in O365, and getting consent from it. Privileges are escalated by changing mailbox rules. and so on. So this is what the attack lifecycle in M365 looks like. Granted, it's very different than what you might be familiar with from an endpoint security standpoint, but that's what we're trying to say here, that M365 is such a critical repository of data. What are you doing to protect it above and beyond just simply subscribing to the service from Microsoft? So turns out that you need a way to prioritize the threats. You really can't boil the ocean in a go, but there will be things that you know, but they'll bite you anyway. There will be things that you should know, but you don't know. And then there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff that you should ignore, but you're kind of lost between, should I ignore this? Is it meaningful to me? Yes, no. See, that's where folks like NetSurian come into the picture, because we can help you with this stuff, and that's the thrust of this webinar. So is M365 or Office 365 merely a collection of productivity applications? Or is it merely just Exchange Online? The answer is no, not really. First and foremost, there is authentication, and there are two kinds. There is the native kind, which depends on Active Directory, which frankly Microsoft prefers, which is the mechanism of choice for many small to medium and even some large companies. And then there is federated access, where you can turn the whole authentication problem away to somebody like Okta or Ping Identity, and you typically see this in very large companies. So for the most part, for the audience that we are addressing here, Azure Active Directory is an essential component. Now, it would work in tandem or be synced with an instance of Active Directory that you may have on premise. Now, some of you might not have such a beast and depend entirely on Azure AD. And so your M365 componentry doesn't just include email, but it also includes Active Directory. Of course, sharing of files through SharePoint and OneDrive is something that's quite popular. And the sleeper hit of COVID, Microsoft Teams, and the amount of effort, the amount of energy that Microsoft is pouring into it, into its feud with Zoom, and into its attempt to get all of us to accept it. If we are an O365 customer, they make it quite kind of hard to ignore Teams, and it's been the runaway hit of COVID. So these are all the components that you got to think about in terms of securing. No good to say, oh, I secured my email and I'm done. No, Siri Bob, you are not done. You got to think about all of these components as well. So after all, EventTracker is a logging outfit, and our main interest is logs, which is how we tell what's going on in M365. So where do you get logs? Back in the day when your Exchange server was on premise, why, you would get logs from your Windows event log. You could get logs from Microsoft Exchange inside the mailbox. What happens in M365? Well, it turns out that there are three core logs that you need to look at. One is the unified audit log, and this is a service which is across Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive and Exchange. Thus, it's called unified audit log, and it's the source of a lot of valuable information for people like us in terms of what's going on, so that we can cut off, the bad guys at the pass, as it were. The second one is a mailbox audit log, and this one's a bit complicated. Why is it complicated? Well, because there is one such in every mailbox. How many users you got? Well, that's how many separate mailboxes you got. And there is some of this information is actually written inside the mailbox. That makes it painful for people like us that are happy to look at a central repository of logging. But that's where it is, folks. And then, of course, there's a separate admin audit log that tells you what's going on through the admin. Favorite attack tactic: compromise the admin credentials, especially if you haven't been able to or gotten around to implementing multi-factor authentication. This has happened to the biggest of big companies. Oops, forgot. Oops, allowed the M365 admin account to get owned. Then they've got the run of the house. Bad news follows. Of course, Azure Active Directory is an important component, but did you know that for the most part, Microsoft isn't maintaining these logs for very long? Some of them are maintained 90 days. Some of them are maintained 30 days. Is that the horizon of all forensic postmortem that you could ever do? Does that satisfy your compliance requirement? A lot of people say 1 year. Some people say 10 years. Guess what? Your problem. You're not sending these logs away from O365 to something like an EventTracker. Oh, well, too bad for you. So you should think about this, because security timelines, particularly in stealthy attacks, goes back a ways. Think about the SolarWinds debacle. It turned out at the end of the day that it was discovered in November, December of 2020, but the attackers had been in place since March. And we're talking about attacking the biggest of the big, FireEye themselves, in order to steal their red team stuff. Apparently accessed Microsoft themselves and got a look at some email is what was released publicly. We're talking about a 9 months before those biggest of baddest of boys was able to uncover that an attack had occurred and go back and find evidence. So what are you doing if all of your logs are disappearing in 30 or 90 days? Hopefully you're doing something else. Mailbox trace. Sometimes you get an idea of what's going on through mail flow. And that is something that mailbox trace can tell you: who's writing to whom, who's being targeted, where is it coming from, what organizations are talking to mine, those kinds of things. And then Microsoft does offer some security and compliance reports. If you're a determined do-it-yourselfer, you're going to build that deck yourself, you're going to go down to Home Depot, you're going to buy the 2x4s, you're going to do carpentry work, then be prepared to look at all of these kinds of logs to do your job. And oh, by the way, you will find them in a variety of management consoles. So be prepared to look around all of these consoles in order to get the information, in order to do what is it that you need to do. So if that is the case, pray tell, what does NetSurian's managed threat protection do to, if you will, save the day? Well, first and foremost, our purpose is to give you a unified view of risk in a single pane of glass. We recognize that M365 is an important, maybe even a critical repository of information, but we're guessing that it's probably not the only one. So then you're going to look one place in 6 different consoles for M365, somewhere else for your firewalls, somewhere else for your on-premise stuff. Well, of course, if you went with EventTracker, you'd get that single pane of glass. The second advantage is to be faster. After all, we are a 24/7 shop, and we're doing this stuff morning, noon, and night. And so presumably with our service, instead of doing it yourself, our team is able to find these kinds of threats faster. Is your network infrastructure pretty much static, or is your company growing? What about on-premise? What about other cloud apps? What about stuff that you might have in your data center? Well, with our managed threat protection, you can cover not only M365, but all this other stuff as well. The skill shortage problem is universal, frankly. And so everybody is fighting for this kind of talent. It's hard to find. It's even harder to retain. They're in such heavy demand that they can pretty much command what is it that they need. Well, if you leave the driving to us, that becomes our problem. It's not that we don't suffer from this too, but it's an order of magnitude thing. If you or your teams are struggling to hire a handful, we are struggling to hire maybe 50 people. But that's a different problem, and you can turn that problem over to us. Last but not the least, show me the money. Managed threat protection helps you because it decreases your cost on account of, A, we're doing this at scale and you're passing some of that savings on to you, on account of you're centralizing your approach. It's not just M365, but everything else in your thing that we're covering. And so therefore, compared to do it yourself, you can see some cost savings. By the way, please feel free to hit up our sales team to ask for evidence of this. They're happy to run a TCO calculator and explain it to you in dollars and cents if that's of interest to you. So M365, if you are a diehard do-it-yourselfer, does in fact have various capabilities, as you saw, various consoles, and you can do things like sharing settings, or granting conditional access, or performing data classification, or you could do the things that we do, which is look at audit logging, look at data discovery. And so there are, to be fair to Microsoft, a number of capabilities in M365. The problem, of course, is that you need to do this for a day job, number one, and you need to do it full time. It can't be something you dabble in. It can't be something that you do in addition to 10 other things that are on your plate, because otherwise, really, frankly, you're not keeping up. And Microsoft has had a dizzying rate of change. As they've seen, to their eternal credit, as they have seen attacks, they are constantly adapting. And so in many cases, their release notes are opaque. You can't quite figure out what they patched it, when they patched it. I mean, as an example, go take a look at Black Hat. Last year, it was virtual. And there was a nice talk on M365. At the time, I think it was still called Office 365, Attack Tactics and Techniques by Mandiant. And they outlined a number of things that they had seen in the year prior. And they acknowledged that Microsoft had fixed some of that, but nobody could quite figure out when they had fixed it and how exactly they had fixed it. Because none of us have inside access to what's going on. So all of us are guessing from the outside. So if you want to do this yourself, that's what's in front of you. So if you want us to do it, then the question becomes, oh yeah, well, what do you guys really do in order to help us out? Well, let me explain. First and foremost, we are running the M365 Integrator program. This is a piece of software that we will provide you if you choose to sign up with us. And it usually runs on the EventTracker console. Why? Because it will fetch logs in near real time from O365, according to the criteria that we supply. You'll see that here in a minute. And it needs to be running all the time. If you want it to run on a Windows workstation that has the EventTracker agent on it, you can do it too. Just make sure that that workstation doesn't go into hibernate or get turned off or somehow otherwise disappear. Otherwise, our ability to pull logs from Office 365 goes away when that machine shuts down. So it's better to do it on a server which never, ever goes to sleep. That program is going to prompt you for an M365 user account, and we're mindful to ask for only the permissions and privileges we need. That's compliance and report reader roles. So you're going to have to create an account which this program is going to use to pull data periodically. It will run as a service, and it will access the M365 APIs using that user account in the previous bullet, the Microsoft Graph, and the M365 Management APIs. It will fetch the logs and send them off to the EventTracker console that I'm going to show you here in a few minutes for further analysis for long-term storage. So Microsoft is wiping these out in 30 days or 90 days. No problem. We've got a copy of it. We're going to keep it for at least 400 days. We're going to see it in the context because an attack might happen on premise and go to the cloud. It might begin with a spam phishing email sent to M365 and then come down to your desktop. And so you got to look at more than just M365 in order to get the full picture. Well, that's really our mission, and everything will be in the EventTracker console. If you're going to install this on a workstation, then note that you need PowerShell 5.0 or later. If you want to enable the message trace function, and you may choose to or may not choose to, at the moment this requires a user that does not have multi-factor authentication. Not our rules, Microsoft rules. By the way, because of that reason, the message trace function is not available if you're doing this on GCC, GCC High, or DoD, because they won't allow you to have an account without multi-factor authentication. So you were going to ask me, isn't it? Is this just plain old M365, or do you support GCC, GCC High, and DoD? And the answer is yes, we do. We support all of them. But note that message trace won't be available in some of them because of how they roll. So what exactly is it that we monitor? And at the end of the slide, I'm going to get to a demo and show you the console. Well, remember I told you that M365 is more than just email. In particular, it is Azure AD, because that's how you get in, most likely. That's how the bad guys are going to get in. There is no VPN requirement. The login screen is visible anywhere in the world if you're on the internet. So what do we do after having fetched all the logs? Well, first of all, we will look at all admin actions, because that's where the bad guys will look to act upon, as you saw in the attack lifecycle slide. User accounts being added, deleted, or escalation of privileges. These kinds of things are of specific interest to our analyst team. Anything unusual going on with changes to password and policies? A favorite attack tactic, if they do compromise your tenant, then they're doing these kinds of things. Why bother to go after individual email if you can make a global rule to forward email? Or you can launch an e-discovery and get it all in one shot. Because there is no restriction to access, and this is available globally, one of the other things we will do is track user logon activities to M365. It became very common as we all went home last March in the face of COVID, that there were logons occurring from all sorts of places that you normally never saw in your tenant. In our particular case, for instance, we have an office in South Florida. Some days after we said to everybody, okay, the office is closed, you need to work from home, we suddenly saw successful user logons from Cuba. And we jumped out of our chair. Of course, we use our own SOC to monitor ourselves, thinking, oh my God, the attack's occurring. Turns out one of the folks that works in the South Florida office, when we said work from home, that's where home was. But thanks to monitoring, at least we were aware of it, and we decided to amp down because this was perfectly legitimate. But it can be occurring in your tenant. Are you watching? Would you be aware? What about when a first-time user logs in from a new location or from an IP address that doesn't really pass muster? This is stuff that we monitor and will alert you on. More than AD, how about Exchange? It's a favorite attack target because that's where the good stuff is. Administrative actions, I should say, mailbox creation, deletion, forwarding rules, favorite topic, right? Insert a forwarding rule, everything going to the CFO is now also going to somebody else unbeknownst to you. Changes to policy. This has become happy because of OAuth and the fact that there are applications that you can grant, that you can run that will get temporary access 30 days, 90 days, depending on the permission you give to O365. And they have very innocuous looking screens. Most users will not bother to get past this and will happily say, yeah, sure, you can have access to my mailbox. You see it all the time, probably on your phone, right? You get an app, it pops itself up, and it says, app is asking for permission to your email or is asking permission to your camera. And what is it that you do? You say, yeah, okay, fine, go ahead. The same thing occurs in M365. So that's become an attack target. Rather than hit you, they'll send you an application and then they will ask for permission. And you will click yes because Apple has conditioned us, FedEx has conditioned us. Just click yes, accept the user agreement, get along with it. And so who reads that stuff anyway? It's 50 pages of tiny text written by some attorney, the heck with that. Just going to say yes and move on. Yeah, well, the bad guys figured that out and they're using it to attack us. Not just Office 365, but OneDrive and SharePoint, and I should have added in this slide Teams as well, because Teams has become one of the killer apps in the modern enterprise. So sites added, deleted, modified, files uploaded, shared to external users. These are big deals that you should really be paying attention to. All right, so then enough of the slides. Let me show you how this thing really looks like. So here I am logged in to my demo machine, and I am logged in as an administrative user. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate to the dashboards and show you specifically what the dashboards look like for all of these components. So these are things that, in this tenant, we have a whole bunch of stuff, including Hafnium, but I'm going to look specifically at Azure Active Directory. Then I will look at Exchange, Online, OneDrive, and SharePoint. So these are some of the simple dashboards that are available. How many people have failed log on? How many people have succeeded? Who exactly is logging on? Where are they logging in from? What countries? Did you expect anyone from Japan to be logging in? And then to the extent that they're failing, what are they failing for? What reasons are they failing for? This is all available, and these dashboards are all drillable. So that's as far as Azure AD is concerned. How about Exchange? Well, you can look and see there's a variety of stuff here, including admin activities. I'm going to show you something a little odd. Now, if you look at admin activities, many of them succeed. But in particular, one of them appears to have failed. Notice this green one. So if we were interested, we could drill down and take a look at what is it that has failed. It turns out to be an action called a folder bind. So if I were to expand this, you'll see that it's a folder bind operation. Here it's folder bind, and it has failed. And if I look further, I am able to understand that this is occurring to a user by the name of Williams. Well, what, pray tell, is folder bind? Well, let's take a look. How to use mailbox audit logs, right? So you will see that the folder bind operation indicates the times at which the mailbox is accessed by a non-owner. So you've got a folder bind and it failed, which meant somebody who's not the owner of that mailbox was actually trying to bind to it. Ugh, what's that about? That is something to investigate. And so this is the kind of stuff that our team would be looking. Did you see it happened at 126 on the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th? This is certainly something going on that would be of interest to us. So this is how you could use, if you're a self-serve kind of customer of ours, or an essentials customer, I should say, this is how you could use our console to get some of what you want done. All right, same thing available for OneDrive, same thing available for SharePoint. You know, for example, here in OneDrive, what sorts of actions are going on? What sorts of file types are coming up? What kind of activities am I seeing? That kind of stuff. And ditto for SharePoint. So this is all available to you in the dashboard to take a look at. What sorts of activities am I getting? Who are the people that are doing these things? What folders are they doing it on? What sorts of files are they working with? That kind of thing. But let's get past this easy peasy stuff and start to look at something a little bit more complex. So I'm going to show you Solorigate, right? Solorigate is the SolarWinds attack. You remember this happened November last year? What were the bad guys doing? Well, they had inserted through a supply chain attack a piece of bad code. Let's take a look here. This is Microsoft's blog. What were they doing? Supply chain compromise. See this? To get to hands-on keyboard on premise, and then ultimately to get to hands-on keyboard attack in the cloud. So they were using the SolarWinds DLL as an access point to actually get to it. So then if you go down further, you'll see that Microsoft describes now in this updated blog some MITRE tactics, and I'll get to it in a minute, but I should be specific and say it's attack tactics. So this is the classification terminology that the MITRE Corporation has provided that has become extremely popular. But if you look, they tell you that from a Office 365 logging perspective, you should go take a look at these kinds of logs if you're interested in threat hunting. In particular, they are interested in add service principal credentials. See this one right here? That's what they're telling you to do. All right, so then my question to our team here is going to be, well, fellas, have we had any of that kind of stuff? And so we can look for that answer by searching for incidents and then specifically looking for configuration change. So here I am, bringing up the search window, and I'm going to look for changes in configuration. Here it is. And I'm looking over the last 1 week, and I'm going to launch a search and say, have I seen this kind of thing in the last 1 week where there's been an add service principal? So let's take a look. I've got something. It's for a company called MTech. And sure enough, here is an add service principal credentials occurring. And apparently we are targeting Jessica at that company. And apparently we are going to do this and go and attach, you ready for this? 7zip.exe. Ugh. So this is a trace of Solorigate that has happened in this company at that time. So long ago, they compromised the on-premise desktop. You cleaned up that instance of SolarWinds by installing the new thing. Well, it's too late, buddy. The horse had already sort of bolted, and all of this stuff is occurring now in M365, and you're busy cleaning up the instance that is on-premise. Let's take another example here of something, and we're going to look for alerts. I'm going to show you an alert definition. As I mentioned to you, they try to compromise you through your login scheme, right, through your Active Directory credentials. So what might be a tip-off that a login that is occurring, maybe even successfully, is suspicious? Is it only because it came from a bad location, or can there be other reasons for it? Well, let's take a look at what our alert configuration looks like. So here, for example, is suspicious login activities. This is our definition of what we consider suspicious. So in the unified audit log, remember we talked about that as the main repository? We consider it suspicious if it turns out that the login happened through PowerShell. Is PowerShell enabled for all of your users? Well, did you know that it was by default? Did you know that you shouldn't allow that? Are you still not doing anything about that? Well, what if the login occurred through PowerShell? The poor user didn't even know, and a script actually logged in like them. Another criterion might be if the login succeeded or failed, but it happened through WinRM. Okay, great. Has that actually happened in our universe? Back to our incidents table, and back to searching to see whether any suspicious logons have occurred. And so let's take a look. We're going to look for suspicious logons. And here I am. Need to go down a little bit more. Here is suspicious logon activities. Again, looking across the last 1 week. And we're off to go see if any of these have occurred. Now, if they have, oh, looky here. Again on MTech. Let's expand one of these. It's Kiara now. Last time it was somebody else. And what's the reason? Oh, look, the user agent is PowerShell. So this is something to pay attention to extra. So above and beyond, the plain vanilla stuff that you could probably get out of M365, there's stuff like this that the analyst team is doing all day and all night. You want these guys on your team. You can get that if you get EventTracker. All right, so then back to the slides. This was our demo on how you actually use this stuff. By the way, as David mentioned, we do have a Q&A session. And so we can, we'll be happy to take questions. So line them up and we can take that as soon as this session comes to an end. Oh, yeah, right. Got to swap. So that's what we monitor. That's how we monitor. Now, as you may know or may not know, we have two offerings, Essentials and Enterprise. And so then, what exactly is included in each is the question. So first of all, priority 1 alerts. These are available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week from our SOC. Then priority 2 alerts. These are available in your tenant, in your portal. And this is something that you can look at. So then if you're Essentials or your Enterprise, there's a collection of these. And of course, if you're Enterprise, you can customize it depending upon your service level and decide what is it that you want. These are the defaults that are included with the service. Variety of reports. In particular, Essentials includes the security summary report. Enterprise offers many M365 reports that are configured as you need. And of course, you saw the dashboard, Azure AD, Exchange Online, things of that sort. By the way, let me show you quickly in the demo, which I seem to have missed, the reports. That's an important thing. Here is security summary. If you're an Essentials customer, then these are the reports that you're getting delivered to your portal. And then if you've opted for Office 365, you notice this blue thing that says 48 of those. So total number of alerts in the period, and then all sorts of other things, indicators of compromise, potential cyber breaches. But then here's Office 365. And if I were to click there, these are the incidents around O365. There's been some spam mail traffic, and you can see the detail. There's been some threat intelligence activity, and you can see the detail right here. Phish filter, anti-spoof, things of that sort. What was the mail subject? All your classic stuff, overdue account, print to digital photo. And now that we're coming up on summer, my favorite, 7 weird tricks or 1 weird trick for a bikini body. It's all bunk, of course. Log on failure details available to you in a report. and of course available to you as part of the dashboards as well. So that's what you get with the service, along with the fact that we've got folks that are sitting at that dashboard, sitting at that display 24/7 and watching this stuff. So in summary, I'm going to tell you what I told you. M365 is a critical productivity app. It contains critical data. It's beyond just email. It's got all kinds of other stuff. Please don't make the mistake of assuming that just because you bought the M365 subscription, it's now Microsoft's responsibility. It isn't. It's yours. They give you a variety of tools, honestly, with which you can use, and some of them are completely free, in order to harden your instance. But a lot of that is on you. So are you sending the logs away somewhere else? Is someone on your team watching it? If the answer is no, then that's a problem. They do their part, but you must do your part. If you do nothing other than just simply subscribe to the service, you risk compromise and theft. The 24/7 monitoring is needed because access to M365 is global. So the attackers are awake, possibly in a different time zone when you are not. Our offering helps you by putting that 24/7 monitoring army on your side. We're experts at this. We do this all day long. And we can cover the attack surface not just for M365, but everything else that you have in your arsenal. So with that, I'm going to ask David. David, how are we doing on Q&A?
We've had several questions come in, so ready to go with that. If you have any other questions you would like to ask, please enter them in the questions tab now, and I will make sure to get those to Ananth. So we're going to start off with this one, Ananth. What if I upgrade my Microsoft 365 seats to E5? Won't that be better?
Good question. So as you probably know, subscriptions to Office 365, or I should say M365 now, come in a variety of service levels. E1, E3, and E5 are the common ones. E3 is the most popular and the cheapest of the lot. That includes the productivity applications and allows you to install Office on your desktop as well. E5 is more expensive, but gives you a variety of other things included. And the question is, why bother with all this Netsurian stuff? Why not just go from E3 to E5, and then everything I need from a protection standpoint might be covered? Isn't that a bet? So here are the differences between E3 and E5. So first of all, and I'm talking about list prices. Your prices might be better if you go through a reseller. But an E3 license at list is $32 a user a month, and E5 license is $57 a user a month. What do you get in E3? Well, you get all the apps except Power BI Pro. You get AD Premium Plan 1. You get threat protection, but you're really limited to Microsoft Defender. You get rights management, and you don't get any compliance support. If I upgraded the premise of the question, well, from an apps perspective, you're going to get Power BI Pro, which you didn't get in E3. You'll get a better class of Azure Premium, where you get ID protection and PIM. Instead of, and this is the main part in my view, instead of just merely getting MS Defender, you're going to get Defender for Endpoint, which is, really runs on your workstation, but it gives you better coverage than just plain old Defender does. But you'll also get it for M365, and you'll get it for Azure AD, Identity Protection. This is the extra stuff that you're getting. Of course, you're going to get rights management, and you'll get a better class. You'll do SDK. You'll get an SDK if you want to write to it. You can cover non-Office documentations, and you can do discovery. And this is the big one. If you are in the legal field or you're subject to these kinds of discovery things, you'll get e-discovery. Did you notice that you really get more features? You don't get any additional monitoring. That's on you. So you got all these additional features. Who's watching, can I ask? Yes, you got some extra protection, fair enough. Defender for endpoint, Defender for identity, but none of the responsibility of watching you were absolved with. So in our opinion, you can and should move to E5 if these things make sense to you. If you need Power BI Pro across your enterprise, if you need e-discovery, your legal team feels that this is something that they want in order to respond to lawsuits. By the way, this e-discovery is a very classic target for attacks. A lot of attackers, if they do get control of your O365 tenant, will abuse e-discovery. They will launch a targeted search, find all the information, because e-discovery is looking at Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive and email in order to find what is it that you're looking for. And they will find matching documents, matching text messages, matching emails that conform to your search pattern, and they will list it nicely for you in one plane. It's meant for legal, but of course it's going to be abused by the attacker. So by having it, it became a double-edged sword. So who, may I ask, is running e-discovery searches? Anybody watching? When e-discovery searches happen and the results are collated somewhere, is that stuff going away somewhere else, outside the company maybe? Who's watching that stuff? So merely by upgrading from E3 to E5, to the premise of the question, you weren't fully protected in our view. David?
All right. Next question that came in. Are there any low-hanging fruits to secure Microsoft 365 that you can tell us about?
Yes, in fact, there are. To be fair to Microsoft, they have released a variety of guidance, which are included with your subscription. And before you do anything else, that is probably something that you should do. The main thing that you should think about is multi-factor authentication. Why is this such a big deal? Well, because PowerShell, unfortunately, is a supremely powerful thing that will allow you to do all sorts of things inside M365. Very often there are features in M365 that are visible in PowerShell first or PowerShell only, which are still not visible in the UI. And all M365 users have access to PowerShell by default. Now, it does obey role-based access control, but it's on you to actually configure. PowerShell activities are not tracked, so this is sort of a blind spot. And so what you should do, this is low-hanging fruit. You should disable PowerShell if the user doesn't need it, and definitely you should enable multi-factor authentication, especially for admin roles. This doesn't cost you anything in terms of Microsoft licenses. Yes, it's more of a hassle for your users because they have to log in here and provide 2 credentials. But believe me, this is one of the best defenses that you can have that doesn't cost you any money. Second quick win that you can have is running the Microsoft 365 Secure Score report. This is something that's included in your tenant. You'll have to go to securescore.office.com and log in as an M365 administrator, and you can run this report. It will tell you in specific detail some steps that you can take that don't cost you any money, which will harden your M365 solution. So this is something that you should do today. If you haven't done it, this is something that you should do regularly if you're not doing it. There's no need to try and get perfect. Some of that's simply not possible, not practical, but you should try to get the highest score you can get. So talk about low-hanging fruit. This is one of the ones that's there in the solution that you should take advantage of. Why did we say M365 only for admins? You should do it for every user. If you did that, your attack surface will go down dramatically. The bad guys are really invested in M365 because that's where everyone's keeping their data. And they're learning it, they're abusing it, and they're going to abuse you. Do this, and you'd have reduced your attack surface. Second quick win that you could do, are you still using legacy authentication? I'm talking about no MFA stuff like IMAP and POP. Look, at some point, Microsoft's going to disable this. They said they were going to do it, and then they've provided a lease on life. This is mostly needed by legacy apps. It's not going to be needed by anything new. If you're at a point where you can block this legacy authentication, do it, because the bad guys are figuring this out and they're going to go this route. Why bother with MFA? You know how, for example, how the FireEye guys caught it, right? Well, somebody in the FireEye SOC looked at a request for registering a second MFA phone for a user, and even though that was legitimate, the guy had provided all his credentials, the person in the SOC said to themselves, gee, I wonder what this is about, and took it upon themselves to call the user and say, hey, I see that you're trying to register a phone for multi-factor authentication. Did you get a new phone? Is that what this is? And the user says, but no, I didn't do anything like that. And that's what triggered the SOC analyst like, oops, if he didn't ask for MFA, Who's asking for MFA? And that was the thread that they began pulling on to unveil the entire SolarWinds attack chain. Another easy win, send them to NetSurian's managed threat protection service. You'll have long-term storage. You'll get analysis on it. More important also, or equally important, I should say, gain an understanding of what you have. If you don't know what you have, it's difficult to know when stuff is lost. You don't know exactly what you had, and you may not plan your defenses appropriately. So you should really understand it's not just email, right? As I said, attackers are well aware of this and are investing heavily. David?
All right, thanks. Very, very insightful. Another question just came in. This person has a exchange on their premise, and they're worried about Hafnium. They're asking, does our support only for M365?
Yeah, really good question. So Hafnium happened earlier this year, and it targeted only on-premise Exchange servers. That kind of begs the question, if the code is the same on-premise and O365, why is it that that same code on-premise was vulnerable, but the one in M365 wasn't? There's a lesson in there. There were two specific reasons why, by the way. One reason is that the network in Azure, all of the Exchange instances are behind a web application firewall. May not be for your on-prem Exchange, but it's certainly true in Azure. And the kind of attack that was launched, the web application firewall, or WAF, would have stopped it. So that's one reason. The second reason is that the vulnerability was in OWA, Outlook Web Access. And that is by default turned on for on-premise, but the Microsoft people do their authentication in a different way. So even though it's part of the product, that's a part of the product that they don't use inside M365, which is why the same Exchange in M365 was not vulnerable, but the one on-premise was vulnerable. So what support do we have for it? Well, first of all, we do have a knowledge pack. So if you have an on-premise Exchange server, we can provide you with an agent for it and the appropriate knowledge pack at the console. This requires custom integration. As I said to you, a lot of the data is kept inside mailboxes, so we have to sort of enable all those audit settings. And we will do or can do this for anything that's Exchange 2010 or higher. Of course, Exchange 2019 is the latest, but we know people haven't upgraded at all. So you can get support from us from an on-premise Exchange for all of these things. We will put an EventTracker agent on that server. We will need a user with admin privileges. We will need PowerShell 5.0. And we will have to enable auditing of different sorts in order to protect you. Back at the console, we have all of these reports, for mailbox access, user permission, database changes, and we've introduced a number of Hafnium dashboards specifically for this. But yeah, we do support on-premise Exchange very well. If that's of interest to you, even though this webinar was all about M365, give us a shout. Happy to help.
Okay. Our next question, Ananth, is from a Microsoft partner and reseller. And they're concerned that it's a conflict for them to say that Microsoft security has gaps or feature issues and that's going to hurt their reseller status.
No such fear. Microsoft themselves are quite open about it. Every other analyst or respected graybeard tells you all the time the exact same message that we're telling you, which is you should maximize the use of what you got in O365, but a lot of the responsibility falls on you, not on Microsoft. Their problem is to safeguard their infrastructure. Your problem is to safeguard your data. This is not a conflict of interest between you as a Microsoft reseller and the message you bring.
Okay. This question, maybe our last, let's see how much time we've got. Microsoft says they do monitoring, but is that really just a software code analysis and not 24/7 monitoring?
So Microsoft does monitor their assets inside Azure. They're not necessarily monitoring logins to your tenant because that's on you. So they are absolutely with an eagle eye watching everything that comes into and goes out of M365. And they are acutely aware of who's accessing from where, when, and why. But their interest is to safeguard their infrastructure, of course, right? And of course, they're also monitoring for performance. So then if you're seeing degradation, or you're seeing outages like we saw a few days ago, a couple of weeks ago with Teams, then they're on it, because they need to make sure that the experience is robust and scalable. I mean, you can appreciate that in COVID time, the demand for Microsoft Teams sessions skyrocketed. Well, how exactly was Microsoft keeping up with it such that you got sub-second response time? Well, the answer is they were monitoring all day long. And they're able to burst capacity on demand so that as capacity needs increase, they are applying resources to the table. So yes, it is true, they are monitoring stuff all the time, but it is for their perspective in order to provide a secure service and make sure that your experience is a solid one. Your data is yours to deal with.
All right. Well, that is all the time we have for today. So if we did not get to your question, I apologize, and we'll try and answer those in our follow-up email as well. So thanks for everybody for listening. Thank you, Ananth, so much for all the information and for the demo and showing us so much about Microsoft 365 and how we can protect ourselves. That is all we have for today. I want to once again thank everybody for coming, and Ananth, appreciate all your time.
Bye, everyone. Have a good day.